Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this night-ending bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this night-ending bonus upload, shall we?
Today's first encounter. I could give you 1,000,000 times as a kid and a young adult that I felt scared or paranoid playing in the woods. It's a beautiful place, and I spent my entire childhood getting lost, not literally out there by myself or with friends. As kids, we never got too far out there, but you could actually see the progression of us venturing further and further out as we got older because of forts and carvings we would leave. This one particular time, like 1,000 times before, my friend and I had just graduated from high school. It was our last summer of freedom, and we spent the entire summer camping and hiking out there. We decided to try and find a new place and set up camp and walk for what felt like a few miles before we came to a nice clearing. Before we go too further, this was in the Appalachian Mountains. And this new area was relatively new to both of us. We got the camp set up, fire going, and the plan was to wait until nightfall, smoke some weed, and play Monopoly. For some backstory on my friend and I, my buddy is small, real goofy guy, but comes from a family of foresters and always had a deep understanding of all the trees and different plants you came across. He had no fear of going and camping by himself. If I spent 10,000 hours in the woods, he probably spent 50. As for me, I'm taller, sturdier, and as we got older, I spent more time worrying about women and sports, and the woods became a place for small parties. Also, I never had the balls to camp out alone. In fact, older me wouldn't go far at all when I was alone because I could never shake that feeling of being watched, which was just paranoia, but still an uneasy feeling. Anyway, camp is set, fire's going, but it's getting lower and needs wood. Sun is down, and we're both cutting up and having a good time. My friend's sitting on his little chair, as he always brought, and loaded up this makeshift bong. And I was crouching, breaking some excessive limbs off of the log we had gathered for the fire. All of a sudden, this strong breeze cuts through the clearing. I couldn't tell you if it was the suddenness of it or what, but my friend and I both stopped immediately and looked at each other. The breeze went just long enough to flicker out our fire down to a small flame. We both sat completely still in almost total darkness. Neither of us said a word. Across from us on the other side of the fire, we could hear footsteps. They sounded like somebody was running and would slow to a walk and run again. Definitely bipedal. By the sound of it, they were pacing back and forth in the same spot. Then, just like it started, it stopped with a softer crunch on the underbrush. I knew by the sound it had taken a crouch. I was crouching still, and I knew I was staring right at it in the dark. My friend grabbed my shoulder and said, "Buddy." And when he did that, I felt this surge of fear come over me. I could feel it and hear it in him. I had been so fixed on the footsteps and rationalizing what I heard that I hadn't even considered being afraid. But this was true, it was raw, and it made me feel helpless. I could hear my friend, after a while, grab some leaves, and he dropped them on the fire. For a split second, the leaves covered the fire, and we were in pure darkness. Then the fire sprang to life. We both quickly grabbed more leaves and brush and threw it on the fire. I got some sticks and logs on there, and neither of us took our eyes off the spot or moved much over an hour. Finally, the leaves crunched and it slowly walked off. Whatever it was had crouched, watched us without moving far too long than a wild animal would. It wasn't until after the footsteps disappeared that I realized the smell had disappeared as well. It smelled like a paper mill, spoiled eggs almost. For the rest of the night, besides whispering remarks, neither of us really moved or stopped looking at that spot. Nobody went into the tent, and I had a very short, light sleep sitting on the ground with my head resting on my hands. My friend never went to sleep. In the morning, we packed up and silently walked home. To this day, we talk about it. In the 7 or 8 years since it's happened, my forester friend has not camped by himself out there since. Today's second encounter. It was the winter of 1997, I believe. I was living in Ketchikan, Alaska, serving in the National Guard as an 11B. I loved it. As some may know, a joint task force between all branches of the military began working on building a road on a nearby island, a net island. This was a fulfillment for a 50 or so year treaty the United States made with the sovereign Indians in Mechladaca. This was a big project that I believe finished in 2007. Anyway, the Marines spent the first summer building the headquarters. It was a series of plywood huts and a framework of a mess hall. When summer ended, the huts were basically just sheds. There was no electricity or running water. Well, me and 5 other members of my unit were called to active duty. We were tasked with living on the island for the winter and protecting the camp. Apparently, the local native youth would hop from island to island, vandalizing vacant logging camps and such. This was classified as a training mission for budget purposes. It seemed like it'd be a good time. 6 months in the winter on a remote island living in a plywood hut. At first, things were somewhat rocky. There was only going to be 4 or 5 of us on the island at a time in the weekend rotation every 2 or 3 weeks for 1 or 2 of us. It took a couple of months before we had a real generator or propane to cook with, so we subsidized on MREs 3 meals a day for quite some time. The worst was that there was only one outhouse in the entire camp, which was placed a few hundred yards from the camp. To make it even worse, the Native Americans, for whatever reason, declared the ground sacred, and we were not allowed to relieve ourselves on it. That means if you needed to take a leak or drop the kids off at the pool, we had to march down to the outhouse in the Alaskan winter. For most part, I was loving it. We bonded together, told jokes, played push-up poker, and overall, just had a grand time roughing it. To make a long story longer, the heart of the winter came, and so did the snow, lots of it. By that time, we had these weird heaters that ran on diesel fuel, so we were quite cozy in the huts. However, the one facility left unheated was the outhouse. And not only was it freezing, it was filled up. You see, the bay boat used to bring a porta-potty truck had frozen over. By the 3rd month of our stay, the entire outhouse contents were dangerously close to rising above the toilet seat. It was disgusting, it was freezing, it became a nightmare to use. Give me a slit trench over an outhouse any day of the week. Even now, thinking of this massive frozen mound makes me cringe. I can still see the steam would rise from the hole out of the vents of this porta-potty after each use. Anyway, despite the bizarreness of the outhouse, that's not the scary part of the story. One night, as the four of us were lying around on our cots, ready for bed, a few of us were listening to a book on tape that Doc brought with him. I believe it was Carl Sagan's Contact. It was either that for entertainment or Art Bell's Coast to Coast radio show, the only English station we could get on the radio. If you don't know who he was, check it out. It was all about aliens, Bigfoot, and other paranormal stuff. Well, we heard noises outside. Now, that may not seem scary, but let me tell you, we had not heard many noises night or day. There isn't a whole lot of action going on during the winter in the middle of nowhere. At first, we thought it may be the native kids coming to goof off and tag the place or set it on fire. Seemed logical, right? Before we came to this island, we had been given tours of nearby logging camps, which were decimated. We were warned that this was what they would try to do to our camp if we did not protect it. Well, if it was them, we were ready for them. Wait, no, we weren't. Who am I kidding? We would have had to lock and load and go on the offense if it wasn't for a fact that this was a training exercise. I meant we didn't have ammunition. We had M16s, but nothing to go with them. Well, we were now no longer lying on our cots. Instead, we're getting dressed and discussing who it is and what's going on and who's going to investigate out there with an unloaded rifle. Just then we heard the sounds come to our door. It was not human. We could hear them breathing out loud. Our PFC was the one who had been picked to lead the charge, but he flat out refused. None of us blamed him. We didn't want this to become some Alaskan version of Southern Comfort meets Predator, if you know what I mean. So we sat there in silence for 10 or 15 minutes until the huffing and snorting faded. A few minutes after that, we manned up and opened the door. Immediately in the snow, we saw the largest friggin' wolf prints we'd ever seen. I swear the size of these things were as big as a pie plate. Anything attached to those paws must have been the size of a small horse. So, about that outhouse. You remember the one a few hundred yards away? Well, it used to be that. If you woke up in the middle of the night and needed to drain yourself, you would take a hike down to the outhouse. Not anymore. Instead, we made a massive patch of yellow snow right next to the door. It became customary to open the door, point to the side, and melt some snow. There was no way on God's green earth anybody was walking all that way to the isolated outhouse with those creatures out there in the dark. Our NCOIC, after spending a weekend in Ketchikan, brought back his diving light. This thing was the brightest flashlight I'd ever seen. It made the night into day. Anyway, one night we're joking and smoking. We're teasing the PFC because he needed to take a dump. It wasn't like he could just hang his ass out the door. That was one thing we did not want to find come spring when the generals and other dignitaries would be touring the place. Not at all. The PFC was starting to gather up the courage to actually head down to the outhouse. Good for him. He got as far as opening the door fully dressed for the freezing temp. As he was about to walk out, Sarge flicked on his diving light and pointed it toward the outhouse. He was going to be nice and light the way for him. As the light poured down the hill, we could make out the outhouse, and wouldn't you know it, standing right next to the crapper was one of those wolf creatures. Its eyes lit up like two little moons. It stared up towards us and did not move. Even though we were a good 300 feet or so from it, the PFC hurriedly backwalked deeper into the hut. The Sarge kept his light shined on those unholy-sized creature until it started to overheat. The wolf creature saw us. It knew there was more than one of us, yet it didn't move an inch. It just stood there staring at us as we stared at it. When the Sarge turned off his diving light, it was still staring at us. It was us who had to break our gaze so we could close the door. That creature knew he was in charge. We knew it too. To this day, books on tape give me the creeps. Today's third encounter comes to us from La Minerve, Quebec, Canada. 1990. Jonathan was 6 years old. He claims that he was staying at his parents' cabin. It was him, his father, his mother, and two friends, Mario and Christina. The cabin was half on the water, half on the hill. It was stilted. It was on a swamp overlooking a lake. The cabin was small and had a round window on the top of a triangle roof. Jonathan's bed was situated away from the living room and in the room with the window. He would often fall asleep looking out at the moon, or, if overcast, the top of the fern tree as it swayed. The window was 10 feet from the bottom of the cabin, but given the hill it was another 5 feet. A regular person would need a good-sized ladder to look inside. One night, as he lay in bed, Jonathan looked and noticed that the window was black. No moon, no overcast, just black. He thought it was strange. As he watched, within about 5 seconds, he saw a pair of eyes pop up from the bottom of the window and then a nose. The head was 1 foot in diameter, round, and filled the entire window. Just from the top of the eyes to the bottom of the nose, he claimed the thing reminded him of the creature from the movie Harry and the Hendersons. It had big black pupils, and its eyes darted around the room, as if curious and looking for something inside. Jonathan didn't breathe, as he was far too scared. He didn't think the creature could see him. He fell out of bed and crawled army style to the living room where he alerted his mother. His father went outside and looked, heard something moving away through the woods from the cabin. Mario went outside too, but it was gone. While they wouldn't admit it, Jonathan noticed that both his father and Mario seemed spooked by something and stayed up the remainder of the night. The next day, after catching a few hours of sleep, his father and Mario went across the river and secured a boat. They intended on going out onto the lake for the night and fishing, and returning it in the morning, hopefully before anyone noticed. Jonathan and his mother were standing on the shore as his father and Mario went on the boat, paddling. It was a full moon, and the light helped to illuminate the area. At first, the two men, both pranksters, were joking about there being something in the woods behind Jonathan and his mother, trying to scare them. Soon their joking turned deadly serious when they apparently spotted something and began paddling back to shore, freaking out. Jonathan turned and saw an entire row of huge trees suddenly bending as if something massive was coming through the forest. Then Jonathan and his mother, both realizing the situation was no joke, jumped on the boat and the four began to paddle out to the middle of the lake, where they remained until morning. They didn't see anything on the beach, but assumed it was hiding in the trees watching them. This event would put an end to their excursions back to the camp. His father would not stay another night thereafter. And then in 1993, Jonathan didn't see the creatures, but was present when it was seen. He was 9 now. His father was driving the car, and Mario was in the passenger seat. It was nighttime. They were driving back to the camp. The road was quite treacherous, and so the cars usually only went about 45. Mario had his window down and was grabbing at the trees, pulling off leaves and throwing them at his dad. Both were joking around. At some point, Jonathan's father began screaming for Mario to roll up the window, and he swerved sharply in the road, causing Jonathan to wake up. Jonathan had kind of dozed off in the back during the drive. He saw that his father was freaking out and driving extremely fast. When Mario asked what was going on, Jonathan's father insisted that a huge man had been standing on the side of the road with its hand out, as if it was going to high-five Mario's hand as they passed. Mario did not see it, however. Mario thought it may be a hitchhiker, but his father was adamant that the creature was too huge and just standing there. Why would somebody be out in the middle of nowhere in the forest at night? Jonathan claims that his father was deeply worried about the remainder of the drive. Today's fourth part of the upload. Over the heath there was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water, but it did. It was made of brick with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of the incident it was just a shadow of its former self. It did not have any doors, and the windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids playing over the heath, and they all told us it spooked them and made their mates as they did us. It was a really hot summer day. In the summer holidays, the boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, including myself, were being little brats. So the boys said they would take us out to the blackberry picking and keeping us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time. So we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us to do. A half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all very excited as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Grand's blackberry pies were the best. Grand's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other and then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were on our way again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always had, half because they liked scaring us, and half because we used to beg them to do it for us. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousin H or B. They were masters and so believable we loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near that thing. Not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wives' tale urban legend that we knew about the waterhouse. The tale goes, once in the early 60s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area, and they were real nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gangs was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It's said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over the heath to hide out in the waterhouse. It was newish at the time and was perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang, months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse. A few years later, the weird stuff and creepy noises started to occur near and around the waterhouse. Mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed, moving stealthily among the pines and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging river weeds was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spat of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation that the waterhouse left. It was abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so weary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. We were all far enough and through the gap of the fence from the waterhouse. Us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building before being rounded up by the older boys. They put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field where some of the other local kids we knew were already there, and we had spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy blackberries and splashing in the river, and soon the sun was getting low. Time for us to go home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering and laughing. The older boys were still winding us up slightly, but being as it was getting later, we were feeling weary and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the three older boys got me out of the wheelchair so that B could fit over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, something moved at the back of the bruv. B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm going to have a look." Passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A. We got it." Having put me in the wheelchair, B had moved towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the two boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of the wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did. B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up and running. A grabbing the other two kids' hands, following B, and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see?" "Yellow eyes and a hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it'd be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from that waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervous. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. He just said that we got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell. And as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my aunt just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell Mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and the hairy face, or find out exactly what it was, but us kids didn't go near the waterhouse for a long time after that either. Today's final encounter. This encounter was told to me by my daughter from my first marriage. Her mother and I were separated by this time, and she had remarried. This occurred in 2003 and disturbs me to no end. My daughter was around 11 at the time, and she has a brother and a sister a few years younger than her. They were living in the Ozarks regions during late evening before sundown, and they lived in a little rural area surrounded by woodland fields. They were playing hide and seek with a couple of neighborhood kids in a little trailer park they were living in. My daughter was hiding by a rabbit hutch near the old woodland when she noticed something on the edge of the timber. As she looked, she saw what she can only describe as a wolf at first glance. Then she noticed it was standing on two legs. It was crouched, watching her. She said she didn't feel scared at all, but was actually comfortable and felt an inviting vibe from it, as she said she was safe and she wanted to get closer to it and try to pet it. It was black in color and very large with red eyes, and she felt like it was beckoning to her to come over. But then her mother just happened to step out just in time and called them in for dinner. So she waved at it and ran indoors. She claims that later her brother and sister and her had all seen it. Her brother was scared and felt threatened. Her sister also felt scared and was warned away. I feel like this thing was watching these kids and made a selection of which one of them it wanted and then tried to coax my daughter to go with it, and that it scared the living hell out of me. How close was my daughter to becoming another missing person, lost forever? This thought still chills me to my bones.
Well, there you have it, folks. This night ending bonus. I do hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories, judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect we all deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there, and they are definitely dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Till next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the answers, and God bless.